You'll forgive me if I admit to the fact that I'm an accountant. I say that in the context of what we are talking about here today, and that is that, to me, I try and apportion accounting and profitability to, in fact, much of what is being discussed here today. And looking at it from the perspective of the employer or the lodge owner, we can talk as much as we like about what we want to do, but it will only really be implemented if it is something that makes economic sense to the employer ultimately. And I say that because the cost of training and development and the cost of recruitment and, in fact, the cost of employment is so enormous in this country that we just have to be practical about the financial aspects of what we're talking about here. And so Erica was pointing out the cost of her training programs. It'll be wonderful to have the most wonderful training programs for the guides and for the trackers and whoever, but it's not going to work if it's going to cost too much in terms of the economic and commercial realities of what we're talking about. And so I find that, for example, Lindy brought up earlier the example of what constitutes a guide at the present moment. It's a person who comes out of school who's looking for a gap year, who's probably come from a wealthy family who can afford to allow him to have a gap year, him or her, and who goes into a lodge and enjoys himself for that period of time. Getting tips is fine. It enables them to go back home for the weekend. Getting a salary, well, they're also getting board and lodging and a wonderful something else. What I'm trying to point to is the fact that this cost to the employer is limited to that reality. And now to introduce a wholly trained professional person as being the alternative has to be something that is bought into by the employers. And every employer has to be part of this discussion, frankly. They have to buy into the fact that we are talking about professionalization of this industry, which, with all the costs that go with it. And there has to be an acceptance that there is a transformation process in South Africa which is absolutely necessary from a highly political point of view. And it's that buy-in that I think is essential from the employer level that I belong to be part of. There are only four bodies, if you like, who are going to end up paying for what we are talking about here. It's the student himself, it's the employer, it's the government, and it's the consumer. And we have to look at a way in sharing those costs among four separate bodies, if you like, to be able to make it affordable. If you allow it to just fall on the hands of the employer, he won't be able to afford it. The government has to come to the party, and so do the various other structures which will fall under that. Thanks, Ruby.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, do we have a question there?
Sorry, I think one of the things with the other employees' guides, and we're going to come to the party, the only thing that makes them realize that there's risk. And the industry is kind of slowly improving. It used to be one of the glass at level 1, now it's one of the glass at level 2 trails line, or one of the glass at level 2. So it's slowly trying to improve. But if employers who have to pay money and salaries and various things see that there's risk if a guide isn't a 1-year gap student, but is someone who's got a level 2, or got 2 years, or got this, got that, there's less risk. And then they will toe the line, or if they can see the bigger picture where there's benefits of repeat guests or word of mouth or whatever else the benefit is. So if there aren't those two factors in it, it's hard to make someone just come to the party. So I mean, if they can get away with the 1-year gap.
But I think that's a very valid point. It's not only risk, business risk, it's also the quality of what you're providing in the way of the guest experience. So if the individual guide imparts a far better quality of experience at Lodge A than the guys are imparting at Lodge B, theoretically the market moves the guests to Lodge A. And it's that level of capability of the guides in Lodge A relative to the rest of the guides that is going to make the change in this industry. And it will become a business risk, yes. You can't afford to be running a business out of a bunch of gap year students when this lodge is employing absolute superstar, professionally qualified people. And that's going to be what will draw the market away. But at the present moment, the market, in my perception, is almost exclusively the gap year type guy. And you'll get different standards of gap year type people, and people who will last a year, people who will love this as a 2-year or 3 or 5 or even a career. But when you get to the point where you're having children now and what have you, and you're living in the bush, how do they educate the children? You know, that's when the career question becomes a point where you've got to have some process where you move from being the guide in the bush to being somebody perhaps in hospitality and management and so on. And it's that channeling of the vocation that we have to focus on as well.